Voice of an Angel by Tim Harvey. Life as a teacher has its ups and downs. I've been a primary school teacher for the past 23 years and have worked in numerous schools in the roughest and most deprived parts of London. At times the job is rewarding, and seeing the children leave in Year 6 prepared for their secondary schools gives me great pleasure, the reward for our labours. However, there's another side to teaching, namely teaching children who have behavioural and emotional difficulties, often the product of their upbringing. Dealing with such children is a challenge and very time-consuming and very tiring. As I've got older, the strain is taking its toll. The first element of my life to be affected by this professional dedication was my marriage. Jane, my former wife, left me for another man 3 years ago, and now I live alone in a modest bedsit in Highbury. I live a simple life, split between home, school, and the local pub. The second element affected by my stressful job is my own health. I find it hard to sleep without powerful sleeping drugs, and I visit the doctor's surgery once a month for my sleeping draught. Some mornings I cannot wake up and get myself mobile without a great effort on my behalf. I then arrive at school just as the bell is ringing. The head teacher frowns, but my health secret is still safely hidden from her knowledge. Anyway, I make up the time later by running after school clubs, and this seems to keep Helen the head happy. I love for the weekends and holidays. I enjoy walking, but my greatest passion is music, specifically church choral music. For many years I was church organist and choirmaster in Highbury, and I used to run a very successful parish choir made up of children and adults from the ages of 8 to 70 years. The musical tradition at All Saints was second to none, and we used to sing at various cathedrals during the summer holidays. I used to enjoy this musical life, and playing the organ was my greatest reward. This musical chapter of my life came to an end 8 years ago, when I couldn't find the time or energy to continue with it. In hindsight, this was a mistake, but we often live our lives full of regrets, don't we? I walk over to the CD player and put in a disc. The sound of a boy's treble voice floats from the speakers. I sit in the chair enveloped within the covers of this heavenly music. My mind starts to wander through the clouds of memories. I'm in the choir vestry taking the junior choir practice. The door bursts open and in walks James Hyland. James, a very disturbed 10-year-old, dressed in a dirty tracksuit bottoms and a soiled white t-shirt, walks up to the piano. The singing stops, and he stares at me from underneath his blonde fringe, his piercing blue eyes fixed on mine. "James, have you decided yet?" I asked. "I'll give it a go, Mr. Bradley," trying hard to hide his nervous disposition. "Well, sit yourself down, and Brian will keep an eye on you. We're learning Paris I Was Glad. That's it, turn to page 4. Decana, are you ready?" I noticed his dirty hands and nails, but resumed my piano accompaniment, disregarding the observation. With the rehearsal over, the boys rushed off and James hung back. He obviously didn't want to go and play football in the park before the block of flats, concealing the summer evening sunshine. This is where my responsibility of James's emotional and behavioural needs commenced. It had begun when James arrived in my class at school, and I realised he had the voice of an angel, but not the demeanour to match. His mother showed very little interest in him, and he would often wander this state, getting into all sorts of trouble. If I could persuade him to join the choir, this would ensure his safety for at least 2 points of the week. This became my mission, and it appeared to be successful. Managing James within the context of choir was not easy. He would often fly off the handle and storm out of the services and rehearsals when things didn't go the way he thought they should do. Sometimes he would physically attack other choristers, but he never hit me. I almost ran out of excuses for his behaviour, and the other choir members and clergy became impatient with him. Our ways were soon to part, and my influence on him would cease. Bang on cue, the CD starts to play Panis Angelicus by César Franck. My thoughts resume their previous course. It was the day before our patronal festival, and I was rehearsing the choir. James, our soloist, arrived late and in a bad mood. It took all my skill and patience to encourage him to sing his solo well. We tried the anthem for the last time, and I asked the choir to give it their very best. The organ started, the haunting introduction, and James settled to sing to the glory of my God. There was an expectant hush filling the church and chancel. He started to sing. The choir were transfixed and transported to that ethereal plane that only singers can experience from time to time. The choristers were so engrossed that they nearly missed their entry. The final chord came, with the 32-foot pedal note buffeting gently the air. The choir erupted into applause after the practice, and I shook James's hand. He smiled from ear to ear, a rare occurrence for him. Tears almost filled my eyes, the potential reward for my philanthropy. Suffice to say, James did not turn up for the service the following day, and when I took the register at school, there was a note from the secretary. It appeared that James had left London with his mum. There was no forwarding address. They were on the run from her estranged partner. My heart fell, my hopes dashed. I switched off the CD and put on my coat. This languid memory is painful for me. It was time for my late appointment at the doctor's. I needed some more sleeping tablets, but preferred to have the last appointment to avoid being seen by prying neighbours and colleagues. As I walked through the rain-filled dark streets to the surgery, my mind resonated with choral music. Various settings of the canticles ran their course through my mind. At one point I had to resist the temptation to sing out loud. I reached the surgery and closed the heavy oak door behind me. The reception area was empty and Janice sat at her desk. "Hello, Mr. Bradley. The doctor is just finishing with a patient. He won't keep you a moment," chirped Janice Bradshaw, the attractive, mature receptionist. I smiled and sat down, picking up a battered copy of Country Life to pass the time. 10 minutes later, an elderly lady emerged from the doctor's room and shuffled her way to the door. The buzzer went, and I walked through the double doors into the doctor's for my prescription. It was at times like this that I considered myself to be a drug-dependent addict. The consultation followed its usual course, but there was a sudden sound of shouting outside. Dr. Prentice looked up and walked purposefully towards the door to see what the source of the sound was. As he approached the doorway, the door flew open and sent him to the floor, catching his head on the edge of the table. The doctor's eyes were closed and blood started to soak into the carpet from his motionless body. I rushed to his aid, but I froze when I saw the barrel of a handgun pointing towards my head. "Sit down and you won't get hurt," ordered the nervous man in his late teens. Through the open door I could see Janice Bradshaw, bound and gagged. Her eyes were fixed on the intruder. I sat down on the chair and carefully thought about my next move. "Can I attend to the doctor?" "Leave him there." "Now where does he keep his drugs?" snarled the short, blonde, cropped-haired criminal. I noticed his pale skin and the saliva beginning to emerge from his tight mouth. Sweat covered his forehead, and he removed the tracksuit jacket and threw it casually, yet disrespectfully, onto the doctor's desk. "He might die. Do you want that on your conscience?" I retorted. "I don't have a conscience. I had that beaten out of me many years ago. Where's the bloody cabinet?" The young man picked up a fire extinguisher and threw it at the plate glass cabinet. The glass shattered, covered the floor, revealing the medicines ready for the taking. With the stealth of a fox, he inspected each package, pocketing those of value and discarding others on the floor. I admired his knowledge and the way he managed to hold the gun and complete such a desperate task with ease. I sat motionless, yet calm. He controlled my destiny for the time we shared this room. I did not want to alarm him, and remained compliant. As he placed the last package in his trouser pockets, I noticed how dirty his hand was. I began to study his complexion. I needed to remember what he looked like for the police investigation, after all. His ears were pierced with 4 small gold rings, and his delicate nose decorated in a similar fashion. He was good-looking, clean-shaven, but his pale skin was encrusted with grime. His body or clothes not washed for many days. He saw me look at him and fixed his pale blue eyes onto mine. "Get on the floor and be quick about it." I fell to the floor and looked away from his powerful gaze. He seemed to freeze in remembrance. The room became still and we both remained motionless. I felt fear and started to chant the words of the Lord's Prayer in my head. I was, after all, preparing to meet my Maker. The room started to fill with pulsating blue lights. Voices commanding authority reverberated through the closed window. "You're surrounded. Give yourselves up and make your way to the door. Do it now." The youth leapt towards the window and in one quick motion shattered a pane of glass and fired 3 single shots through the forced aperture. The distant voices went quiet as the policemen took cover. They needed backup to cope with an armed assailant, especially it was now a hostage situation. The man crouched next to me and whispered in my ear, "Is there a back way out?" With my face turned away from him, I told him the possible route of escape. He crawled towards the inner door and left the room. I stayed on the floor and listened as he tried to break out of the surgery. Further gunshots rang out. The armed response unit had blocked his way, and I was now one of the 3 hostages. He entered the room again out of breath. He lit a cigarette. "Do you smoke?" "No, I gave it up years ago. You carry on." I was amazed at my own calmness. He sat on a spare chair away from the window. "Get up and sit on the chair." He looked at me with a fixed gaze. "I know you, don't I?" It was only at this point that I realised I was talking to an older version of James Highland. "Mr. Bradley, isn't it?" "Yes, James. Why are you doing this? What has happened to you?" "Beggars can't be choosers. I was dealt a bad hand many years ago. This is the only way I can make ends meet. I steal drugs, sell them to punters on the streets. Some people call it a living." James seemed genuinely pleased to see me. His body language changed, regaining his youthful stature. We talked for a while, but the unnatural situation prevented us from continuing further. The urgent voices outside spoke again, and the situation became tense. I decided it was time to take charge and test whether this petty criminal would receive my reformer authority. "James, look, you're trapped. Your future hangs in the balance. Why don't you give yourself up?" "No, never. I'm not going inside. I'd rather die." James gazed through the shattered window, searching for a way out. "Let me speak to the police. You haven't killed anyone. Let me intercede on your behalf." "What good will that do? They never take me alive." His voice became agitated. The stress was getting to him, and he was about to do something foolish. I stood and walked towards the window. James shouted, "What do you think you're doing? Sit down." His voice shook with feigned rage. Through the open window I identified myself and spoke openly to the officers. Through my careful negotiation I arranged our safe departure from the scene of the crime. James reluctantly followed me as I walked towards the front door. Janice, the receptionist, froze in terror as she watched us leave the building. I opened the door and was blinded by a bright beam of light from a squad car. "Come away from the building and drop your weapon." I couldn't believe that I had forgotten to remind James to leave the weapon behind. He motioned to throw the gun to the floor, but an armed officer misread the situation and sent a single gunshot in the direction of my former chorister. James caught the bullet in his stomach and slumped backwards onto his back. I caught him and broke his fall onto the rain-soaked tarmac. He was in pain and mortally wounded. The rain washed his face, almost cleansing him from his former sins. Yet I was powerless to help. While we waited for the ambulance, I cradled James's head in my lap. His eyes were shut, but he could still hear me. He broke the silence. "Sir?" "Yes, James?" "Do you remember my solo?" "Like yesterday. You had the voice of an angel. Only wish that you could have sung for me longer." I spoke with sincerity and meant every word. James lost consciousness, and he used his jacket to stem the flow of blood emerging from the wound in his stomach. I could hear the sound of the ambulance fighting its way through the traffic and roadworks. Its progress was painfully slow as James' life hung in the balance. James opened his eyes and tried to sit up. I told him to rest and take it easy. He looked at me. I owe you something." "What's that?" "I never did make that solo, did I?" "No." "Let me make it up to you now." "What do you mean?" "I'll sing it for you now." I was surprised but remained silent. Through the noise of the city, the rain and busy police personnel, he started to sing Panis Angelicus. His now adult voice, clear, trained, spoke to my very soul. He remembered the phrasing I taught him, obeyed the breathing and technique exactly as I taught him 8 years ago. The atmosphere was electric, and everyone froze in respect of this beautiful sound. With the Requiem anthem finished, he spoke his final breath. "Just like you taught me, eh? Once you got it, you never lose it." His body became limp, and my tears flowed without restraint. Tears of regret for this lost soul. If only the bread of the angels could have touched his own soul over the years. Life was never the same for me again. Although a hero, I suffered a complete nervous breakdown and spent many months in hospital under close supervision. I received early retirement on grounds of ill health and moved out of London to a small seaside resort. I started a small bed and breakfast business from my severance pay, and I live a simple life serving the tourist community. When darkness falls, the curtains are pulled, and the guests are tucked up in their beds. The sound of a solo boy treble floats dreamily from my dimly lit front room. I will never forget James Highland, the one I failed.